Hi, I'm Peter from Blackfoot Cybersecurity. I'm a QSA and a 3DS QSA. I'd like to chat today about how we can move from stressing about an assessment to thinking about compliance as a permanent thing and giving us confidence and success in moving forward. Now, we wouldn't be anywhere in a presentation without a metaphor or two, and I'd like to think that I'm not that QSA standing on the sidelines watching anybody struggle. But my own experience does show that people sometimes do go through a peak and a trough when it comes to assessment activity and restarting their efforts each year. And that's not a great place to be. And I'm not naive to the demands being placed upon people's roles, but hopefully by the end of the session, we can see the benefit of continuous momentum in maintaining compliance and see that that's far easier from starting from scratch each year. Now, to sort of set the scene, there are two UK bodies in the UK I'd like us to think about. One's called EDISA, and one is the Food Standards Agency. Why are they important? Well, EDISA is something that helps with asset recovery and data protection considerations. And Food Standards Agency, they're making sure that food preparation areas and places where we eat are all safe. Why are they different? What's common about them? Well, both of them have a situation where you're contracted in a position where you have to accept an unannounced direct assessment whenever they deem to turn up. They can just turn up whenever they like. So, why is that important? Well, we, as the QSA community, should be thinking, is my organization and those I work with in a position where I could pass a PCI DSS assessment which is unannounced? That should be our aim. Now, let's think about the things that can happen normally. It's 1 month to go. We set up a scenario, we've sent off our sort of documentation list for our customers and a list of interviews, and 1 month to go. And then what happens? Well, it's sort of the panic sets in, and this is where the challenge comes. So it's the great documentation hunt, because let's face it, network diagrams haven't been updated since the last assessment. There's no Q2 internal vulnerability scan. The file review didn't happen last time around, and only 40% of you people have done their required security awareness training. Now, I'm not exaggerating anything here. Nothing's been added for sort of romantic or sensational purposes here. It's just normal life. It's very real and more common than we would like. So, what can we do? Well, some of those things can really be fixed quite easily. It might mean going and sort of throttling people around the neck to do their training, sitting on people's desks while they update something. And of the people in the room, the QSAs, the eagle-eyed QSAs, you'll notice all this documentation has been updated at a very similar time, which is not ideal. But you know what? It's going to be there. And you might be able to get, an updated attestation of compliance in time, but that's OK. But some of those things can't be resolved too easily. They're very unfixable, and you might be stuck. What about the missing scan? What can you do? You can't go back in time. What about a missing firewall review? Again, we're in trouble. New developers miss going through code validation processes. You cannot be prepared for these, and you can't paper over them. You are now stuck. So what can we do? Now, council members throughout the day have been talking about going to the document library to download something. Sadly, you can't download that one, the get out of fail, get out of jail card. But what should we start thinking about? Well, confession's really good for the soul. So if you know, as an assessed entity, that you've got some problems, I personally would say to my clients, please don't let me find something. Confession's good for the soul. Let me know now if something's problematic and difficult, something that might be relating to a frequency-based item. Tell us up front so we can plan for it. Because if you do that, you are preventing the doubt from raising in our minds that this is, what else have I got to try and find that they've been hiding from me? Fortunately, PCI DSS since version 4.0 has a mechanism to allow us to deal with these kinds of things, because it does cater to the fact that we're not perfect and things can go wrong or get overlooked. However, we need to sort of try and think about how can we, within our normal operations, plan for dealing with this. So if you're not sure what this section is in DSS, you can go to section 7, page 26, and there's your homework if you don't know what it is. In plain terms, if you know or have used 27001 as a security framework, it's the non-conformity process, and we'll have more about that later. The thing to try and start doing is practice continuous compliance. And the idea is to design your frequency-based processes to include a validation step automatically, so it self-validates and helps make sure it can't fall down, rather than being independent from other things. And the idea is it's then got the ability to detect its own failure. Now, that might be through using a compliance solution. It might be through ticketing, or it could be through an internal audit process. All of those are really good at helping this do the right thing. But you do have to shift your mindset. That's come up a couple of times in other presentations. Shift your mindset from focusing on the sprint of the assessment that comes up at the end of that 12-month period to being something that's more predictable and less traumatic, so it's a daily stroll. And if you slip up, we investigate, we fix it, and we learn from it. Now, what does continuous compliance actually mean in real world? So it's a commitment to ensure your organization at all times can remain as fully compliant as possible. And it must come from leadership. And it must come with the right tone and the right resource allocation. It can take various formats. That could be tooling. It might be giving you budget. It might be leveraging something you've got already via internal audit. We've heard about 3 lines of defense. It could be leveraging and ticking into those. Or it could be using something like 27's own processes. Designing that commitment really needs to go into the operational activities. Without it, it's just a vague statement that anyone can misuse and make. Remember that continuous compliance as an overall thing is not about a specific PCI DSS requirement. Those tactical details, such as something like change management or logging or other aspects of the DSS, those things are actually for the requirement operators. And the view of continuous compliance is to have the governance layer on top of that that can oversee and flag and identify when the ship is off course, number 2, on any given control. So focusing on compliance and those validation activities, just a reminder, is not just for service providers, and that might make a bit more sense shortly. What can you do here? So requirement 2.4.2 is a really good starting point, irrelevant to your status of merchant or a service provider. Why? Because if you look specifically at the customized approach objective, it states, the operational effectiveness of PCI DSS controls is verified periodically by manual inspection of records. This is a really good starting point that you can build on based on your own environment. The defined approach can also be really helpful here, but that's quite long, so I'm not going to say what all that is. We must identify owners, like any good compliance process, for all the requirements that apply to your environment. We need an expectation of what evidence that we would need. That could be what we'd need for our own processes or what you would expect your QSA to normally see. And you've got a really good set of information there because it might be last year's rock. Collect some evidence regularly. It's an activity, if it's an activity with regular stuff, such as policy reviews, patching, change management, then you can actually set up your reviewing processes in line with those collection activities. Assign your responsibilities to those owners so that they can maintain their ongoing compliance. But that sort of oversight activity should be a separate person to the control operator so that you've got that segregation of duty. And then you should be able to move forward. A couple of useful tips now with systems that you might come across regularly. SharePoint, use the Alert Me option. That's built into document libraries, and that can let you know when something's changed. That could then alert somebody within the compliance operations to keep an eye on, see what's going on. Your service management solutions, your sort of ITIL-based and aligning solutions, really leverage your CMDB, speak to who operates that. Add in PCI or CDE components so that when you're raising relevant tickets, it can launch activities, workflows, some sort of thing to happen, which can help you to look at PCI controls and determine, is that something I should pay closer attention to? Use tags. Think about other activities like adding users, removing users. Within those ticketing systems, it's giving you really good evidence on which you can start really focusing and saying, is everything up to date for today? I haven't got to worry about 12 months down the line. Did it go wrong during the year? Whatever it happens to be, support these activities with documented processes and have views within those systems so that you can retrieve that data really quickly. Jira and Confluence are super popular. Each of those have got great meta and tagging facilities within them. Leverage them entirely, because that can really help with quickly combining information sets together and having it immediately on screen and available. And then the other thing to consider is cheat sheets, evidence collection cheat sheets. And there's a great one I'm hopefully going to talk about later. Preparing where your information is, because it can be in disparate systems all over the place. And the last thing you want to do is be scrabbling around for it. So if you've got that identified up front, you're in a really strong position. And then finally, auto-recurrence of events. For your frequency-based items, if all of these systems, I think, can do it now, and AI is bringing it on in leaps and bounds, it's the idea that let the system take the stress of reminding you when to do something. And the key thing is, don't rely on a calendar reminder, because they're far too easily just dismissed in the array of everything else which is going on in your life. What if it does go wrong? So it's really important that everyone who needs to know it's gone wrong gets told. Obviously, you don't have to tell everyone in the organization, just the right persons. Investigate and establish the root cause analysis of why it did go wrong. I mean, ultimately, the thing you need to do first and foremost is get the thing done. So whichever recurrent activity got missed, make sure you do it straight away, which either sets a new frequency schedule, or you need to go back onto schedule with the one you've already got set up. Be transparent. Let the QSA know something went wrong, because you've already documented that failure yourself. It should be the input to review your existing procedures and see why they fell down. Was it down to people? Was it down to a process? Was it down to some technologies? And complete your lessons learned activity to know why you had this root cause of this failure, and update your processes accordingly. And for anyone who's done 27001, as I said, we've just done the non-conformity process. It's really strong. Don't reinvent the wheel. A couple of examples. 6.3.3, critical patches. It's difficult to patch environments which are very complex. I accept that entirely. But it's really important that you fact find. Find out who does the actual application of patches and what is their mechanism. What's the approach they're taking? Are they doing event-based? We get told by the vendor, we start the clock. Are they doing a regular cadence? We always do it on the third Thursday of a month. Both are good. Knowing where they are helps you to design. Verifying versus validation at this point. Control owners cannot check themselves that they're doing the right thing. Poacher come gamekeeper doesn't work here. So you do need that independent oversight in this scenario. You can check monthly, spotting issues and difficulties such as holidays, change management failures, change freezes you didn't know about, or other technical problems. When they go wrong, it's about how you react. So you can automate a lot of evidence validation through tickets and other means. It will help everybody. So lean on other requirements here. As an example, review how often you do vulnerability scanning, which is a minimum quarterly. But if you make it monthly, you'll get an auto-validation against your patching activity, because it's going to really light up if there are vulnerabilities within the environment found elsewhere. Due diligence, something you might not do very often. So where do you concentrate your due diligence activities? Make it your aim to find out. How do you find out that there's a new supplier that's affecting CDE or in-scope environment? How do you know that? Updating your scope documentation might trigger it. Change tickets are a great side channel for this, because someone's got to implement something new if a new a new third party's come in. Again, you can't check this yourself, so there's going to need to be that independent oversight, look at the change tickets, and get that evidence without delay of not only what change happened, because it might be significant, but also where is the information about the due diligence? Because sometimes it can be quite hard to get hold of things like contracts and responsibility matrices at the last minute. So log where it is. Automation is amazing. So if you can automate evidence collection, please do so. It could be things like scripts to pull data from systems or going to your ticketing platforms. It could be configurations on servers or firewalls that you can keep pulling, and a sort of a setup query on a ticketing system for default changes against networking or servers or endpoints or any other type of change you might make. Track it with a platform. Now, when I say platform, I don't think I have to mean anything expensive. It can be a well-defined spreadsheet, or it could be something more fancy. But please, again, don't rely on calendar reminders. They're dead unsafe. Document your process. This is for quality and consistency, and ongoing for compliance too. But you must also consider extending this to an SAQ submission, especially when you need something like scope confirmation under 12.5.2. More about that in a bit. Think about your evidence. Use the standard to identify the appropriate evidence for the component. Compliance must become business as usual. That's really important. So what you've got to think about is, for the internal staff, how is them asking a question different than me asking the question? Because it should not be. Because ultimately, if you're doing BAU as normal, it's just a different voice asking the same question. So what's your gain on the efficiency gain on the assessment? Well, we have to always ask questions, we always have to observe, and we always have to collect information. Even when you think it's the same, we have to go through the same process each year. However, the evidence you collect throughout the year makes the assessment easy because you know how to collect the evidence. You're not having to reinvent the wheel each time. You're not having to think, what did we do last year? It's just normal. That's really, really important because it's keeping stress levels down. It also gives you assessment confidence because you know that what's needed by the QSA is the same as what you've been getting all year round. It's nothing changes. And that's really helpful for keeping this stress level down and maintaining momentum in a constant way. Teams spend much less time scrabbling for documentation if you know where it is, and you can just get a refresh of it, or you can self-service. That's a really helpful thing to do in this sort of scenario. And any fresh evidence you do need is readily available and collected. What you're doing at this point by implementing these types of processes, you're reducing your own risk. And that's not necessarily a risk to cardholder data, although that does happen by de facto standard, really. It's more that you're reducing the risk of a fail. You're reducing the risk of any extension because you need to fix anything. And ultimately, the whole assessment should be just easier and slicker and more simple. And the bonus is you keep somebody like me happy, because I don't want to get upset or find an issue when doing an assessment. It's not good for us, it's not good for you. Very briefly, rhetorical question here. You don't have to answer if you don't want. Does anybody perform a ROC-based assessment using SAQ requirements only? I know I do. Sometimes, though, there can be a disconnection between the scope and what the assessment wants. And why is that a problem? Well, continuous compliance should always be challenging its own scope to make sure everything that you need to address is being addressed. And there is a reminder again against FAQ 1331, particularly for QSA-based assessments using SAQs as the basis of the assessment. It was updated during 2024 a couple of times, and once again in May 25, but it did bring something much more into focus, and that's scope validation. So 12.5.2 does require that anyone doing a ROC always does this requirement, even if you're using SAQs as the basis of your assessment. It's an extra one that gets stuck in. So it's really important to look at 12.5.2 because it also has a Brucey bonus because it drags in other requirements. I need an asset list, I need a network diagram, I need a data flow diagram. I also need all of the bits and pieces that go with it. So don't just assume 12.5.2 is on its own, because it will bring in others that you didn't necessarily realize that was there. And the ROC reporting template, it's really disappointing when I hear the expression, my customer never looks at their assessment report once it's finished. That's really, really sad. And why? Because actually, it helps to inform you what your compliance program wants to look for. And it's a really good way of keeping an idea of who you need to talk to and what data you need and what documentation you want. And that isn't always appreciated for SAQ submissions, and let's see how. So here we have 12.8.1 from an SAQ. There's this really funky thing that happens. So in the expected testing column, you've got a bulleted list of just 2 items. And for some reason, some companies go, oh, I think I do at least 2 of those, or I think I do 1 of them. I'll just tick the box. But that doesn't make any sense, really, because for a QSA, when you look at the ROC, those bullet points separate out to 2 entirely different items. So you might have your listed service provider, 12.8.1b, super. Have you got a policy and procedure for it? No. Not sure, because there's this weird idea that SAQ submissions are easier. No, they're not. They're just slightly different. This is where the ROC template comes in really handy. It's your treasure chest. If you don't have clients doing this already, I strongly recommend they get hold of a copy of the ROC PDF and they use it. And they use it in a way such as they get something like Adobe PDF Reader or something else, and they use the comment function. And instead of looking at what I've written, they put links to their own documents. They put language in there that helps them understand why their environment might be slightly different. They list the teams you'd need to go and talk to. They list where you can get the evidence from. What you've got then is a really slick way, when the assessor asks a question, you just look at what you need, and you're in a much stronger position. So what you're doing there is you're minimizing your risk against the great documentation hunt, you're identifying who can answer the questions, and you know what should go in your compliance program for monitoring. So where's the benefit? So we're viewing PCI as continuous rolling assessment, requiring that change in mindset. We've reduced our stress from the annual assessment to just been happening all the time. You are managing your actual account data much more closely because you're looking at that data that's needed to monitor each of the controls going on. And you are getting rid of your spikes and workload. So where we saw this, we are now seeing this. And that's what we should all try and aim for. Thank you for listening. If there's any questions, please come and find me, message me in the app, or contact me on LinkedIn. Thank you.